The train hissed into the station like something wounded and angry. Steam poured from the undercarriage, veiling the platform in a boiling mist. And when it cleared, she was standing there, alone. No luggage, no companion, no name. She wore a faded shawl drawn tightly around her shoulders, boots 2 sizes too big, and a soot-stained dress torn near the knees. Her cheek bore the echo of a bruise, just old enough to stop swelling, just fresh enough to sting in the wind. Passengers bustled past her, calling for cabs, waving at loved ones. But she didn't move. She stared straight ahead, eyes glassy and unfocused, like she hadn't quite caught up to her body. From the station booth, the manager squinted through fogged glass, then, reluctantly, opened the sliding window. "Name?" She didn't answer. "The question ain't cruel, miss," he added. "It's routine." She looked up slowly, brown eyes cracked like parched earth. "I don't have one." He frowned. "Well, everyone's got a name." "Not anymore." He opened his mouth again, but froze. There was something behind her eyes, something feral and exhausted. Instead, he handed her a scrap of paper stamped "Entry" and turned to the next traveler. She wandered through the town square as the midday sun struggled against gray clouds. The wind stirred dust. The town was neither friendly nor hostile, just indifferent. A woman spat in the dirt as she passed. A merchant muttered something about runaways. Children stared openly. And through it all, she clutched a small cloth bundle to her chest, like it contained the only thing keeping her alive. The boarding house rejected her. So did the inn. By dusk, she found shelter behind the general store, a narrow strip of dry ground between 2 barrels. There she curled up, head resting against her bag, and listened. She didn't sleep. Not really. Her muscles were locked too tight. Somewhere near midnight, footsteps staggered into the alley. Laughter followed. 2 men, drunk. "Look at this one slurred, all curled up like a kitten." "Bet she's cold," the other said. "Bet she'd be real grateful." They came closer. Her fingers slid into her boot, wrapped around the shard of glass she kept hidden in the lining. Then, silence. A shadow shifted near the alley's entrance. Heavy boots, broad shoulders, a long coat that brushed the ground. The men froze. One of them whispered, "Grady." And just like that, they vanished. No curses, no threats, just the retreat of cowards who'd seen a ghost. She peeked through the cracks in her makeshift wall. The man hadn't moved. He stood still, facing her direction, smoke-gray eyes glinting under the brim of his hat. He didn't speak, didn't come closer, just stood there. And when she blinked, he was gone. The next morning, Silver Bluff buzzed with rumors. She came in on the night train. No name, no ring. Looks like trouble. "I heard she's from back east, somewhere near the fires." Grady looked at her. "That don't happen. That man don't look at nobody." She wandered the town again, quieter this time, smaller. Hunger chewed at her belly, but there was nowhere left to beg. By evening, she returned to the alley and found it exactly as she'd left it. Cold, silent, wind slicing through the cracks. Tears came then, slow, stubborn. They slipped down her cheeks as she leaned into the stone wall and whispered to the dark, "I'm still here. I'm still here." A boot crunched behind her. She turned. Him, Weston Grady. Up close, he was older than she thought. Mid-30s, maybe. Scars cut across his jawline, not messy, but deliberate, like remnants of something that tried to kill him and failed. His coat smelled of pine and gunpowder. He said nothing, just reached out his hand. She stared at it. And then, because she had no name, no place, no reason not to, she took it. He didn't lead her through town. He led her around it, past the rail yard, past the dry riverbed, into the foothills. She rode behind him on a black horse with a limp and no name. Her arms around his waist, not tightly, just enough to hold on. They reached the cabin after nightfall. It didn't look built. It looked grown, like the mountain had pushed it up and said, "Leave here if you dare." The chimney smoked. Inside it smelled of cedar and tobacco. There were only 2 rooms. Grady pointed to the cot. He brought her bread and beans, clean water, a blanket that smelled faintly of ashes and mint. She watched him silently, and then whispered, "Why?" He didn't answer, just shut the door between them. Later that night, she lay beneath the blanket and tried to believe she wasn't dreaming. But as the fire cracked, her ears caught something, a soft click like a lock sliding into place. She sat up. Grady hadn't locked her in. He'd locked something out. And just before sleep took her, she thought she heard a second set of footsteps walking past the window. Not boots, bare feet, crunching snow. She woke before dawn. The fire was down to a whisper, just glowing embers tucked beneath pale ash. The blanket he'd given her had slid halfway off. She tugged it back over her shoulders and sat up, listening. The house groaned like old bones settling. Wind scratched at the shutters. She rose quietly, feet brushing the cold floorboards, and crossed to the window. Outside, the hills slept under a skin of frost. The horse was gone. Weston, too. Only his coat remained, draped over the back of a chair like he'd vanished mid-motion. The silence was a living thing here. Not dead, not empty. Waiting. She wandered the cabin slowly. The kitchen was basic. Tin kettle, iron stove, a shelf with exactly 4 plates, all mismatched. The water basin was full. A piece of bread had been left out, covered by a cloth. She moved to the other room, the one he disappeared into. The door creaked when she pushed it. The room was spare but lived in. A large bed, a wooden chest at its foot. No paintings, no photographs. Just a single candle on the windowsill, and a comb beside it. But there were no mirrors, not on the walls, not behind doors, not even in the drawer where she found a box of matches and a folded scrap of cloth. Not a single reflection anywhere. She closed the drawer. On the far side of the room, a wardrobe stood slightly ajar. She shouldn't have looked. But something pulled her. Inside, neatly folded shirts, a pair of boots, a silver pocket watch. Stopped at 416, and tucked in the corner, a pale blue dress. Small, laced, with delicate buttons down the back. Not hers, not recent. And behind it, a hand-carved wooden horse, the kind made for a child. The underside had a name burned into it. Lily. She didn't breathe for a long time. The weight in the room changed. It wasn't just about loss anymore. It was about memory that refused to stay buried. She closed the wardrobe carefully, stepped out, and shut the door behind her. The cabin felt colder. Later that morning, she swept the floor, scrubbed the table, folded her blanket. He still hadn't returned. By noon, she heard hooves crunching outside. She watched from the window as Weston dismounted, a bundle of firewood slung over one shoulder. He entered without a word, set the logs by the hearth, took off his gloves. She turned from the window. "Where do you go every morning?" He looked at her. That stare was a wall and a wound all at once. "I don't ask where you came from," he said. She lowered her gaze. "That's not the same." "No," he agreed, "it's not." That night the wind howled louder. She curled near the fire again, her knees to her chest, and sipped tea made from dried herbs he left out. She broke the silence. "Was Lily your daughter?" The air shifted. He didn't turn from the fire. "She was." "And the woman? Was she your wife?" "She was." She waited, but he said nothing more. After a long pause, she whispered, "What happened?" He leaned back, the firelight catching the shadows beneath his eyes. "The fire came fast. I wasn't there." "Where were you?" He didn't answer. Outside, something clattered. Not wind, metal, a hook, a latch. She stood, heart thumping. "Did you hear that?" He didn't move, just said, "Stay inside." He walked to the door, unlatched it, and stepped out into the dark. She waited, barely breathing. Moments passed, then footsteps returned. He entered, face unreadable. "Was anyone out there?" she asked. "Just a raccoon," he said. But his boots were muddy, and the axe from the stump outside was now in his hand. He leaned it silently against the wall and returned to the fire. The next day she ventured a little further. While Weston was gone, she stepped beyond the cabin's clearing. The trees parted just enough to reveal a worn path leading west, toward the ridge. She followed it for several minutes, stopping every so often to listen. He didn't move, just said, "Stay inside." He walked to the door, unlatched it, and stepped out into the dark. She waited, barely breathing. Moments passed, then footsteps returned. He entered, face unreadable. "Was anyone out there?" she asked. "Just a raccoon," he said. But his boots were muddy, and the axe from the stump outside was now in his hand. He leaned it silently against the wall and returned to the fire. The next day, she ventured a little further. While Weston was gone, she stepped beyond the cabin's clearing. The trees parted just enough to reveal a worn path leading west, toward the ridge. She followed it for several minutes, stopping every so often to listen. At the edge of a rock outcropping, she froze. Two wooden crosses stood in the clearing, one tall, one small. No names, just stones laid carefully around their bases. A bundle of lavender tied with twine rested beneath the smaller one. She didn't approach. Instead, she turned and nearly screamed. Weston stood behind her. No sound, no warning, just there. His voice was even. "I said don't follow. I wasn't trying to—" "You were." She backed a step. "I'm sorry." His jaw clenched. "Next time, ask." Then he walked past her, back down the trail, leaving her alone with the wind. She returned to the cabin shaken. That night, she couldn't sleep. Not from fear, but from confusion. The lines between refuge and danger blurred more with every glance, every silence. By candlelight, she removed the cloth from her bag. Inside, a single envelope, yellowed, folded many times. She didn't open it, just stared. Her fingers trembled. Outside, she thought she saw a flicker, movement near the barn. She stepped to the window. Nothing. But when she opened the door in the morning, there were footprints, bare, human, and leading toward the cabin, not away. When Weston returned, she confronted him. "There was someone out here." He looked up from the firewood. "I know." "You knew?" He nodded. "He's been around before." She blinked. "Who?" "Doesn't matter." "Yes, it does." He dropped the bundle of wood. The thud made her flinch. "He won't come near as long as I'm here." She stepped back. "Is that a promise or a warning?" He sighed. "You want to leave?" "I want the truth." A pause. Then, "He's looking for something he thinks I took." "Did you?" "No." "But you took me," she said. His face tightened. "Number you walked in. I offered bread. You stayed." She turned away. "Maybe I should go." He didn't stop her. Just said, "If you do, take the path east. Stay out of the ravine." She packed what little she had. By first light, she left. Cold air clung to her skin. Her breath clouded with every step. But she hadn't made it far before her legs buckled. The fever hit like a storm. She collapsed near a dry riverbed, visions flickering through her head like broken glass. Her father's voice, the slap, the scream she never let out. She remembered her fiancé's hands, the locked door, the silence. She was drifting again. The sky turned white. And then, arms, lifting her. Weston, no words, no scolding, just carrying. Back through snow, through trees, through that awful space between fear and forgiveness. He didn't place her on the cot this time. He laid her on the large bed, pulled the heavy quilt over her, and left. But she heard the click of a second door closing. He didn't lock it. He just gave her space. That night she cried until there was nothing left. And in the morning, there was bacon. Warm, fresh, left on a plate, No note, no voice. But the footprints outside her window were gone. The bacon tasted like memory. Sharp, unexpected, a reminder that warmth still existed somewhere in the world. She sat on the edge of the bed in silence, chewing slowly, trying to decide whether this gesture was a peace offering or a farewell. The room felt heavier than before. Fuller. As if someone had been there while she slept, not just to drop off breakfast, but to watch her breathe. She glanced toward the door. It was open. No lock, no boundary, but it didn't feel like freedom. She rose carefully, still dizzy, still weak. Her legs trembled as she crossed the wooden floor to the small window. Outside, frost veined the grass, catching the morning light like shattered glass. A single bird called, high and uncertain. Weston wasn't in the clearing. She pulled the quilt tighter around her and stepped into the main room. The fire had been re-stoked. Water boiled in the kettle. Her clothes, washed, hung near the hearth to dry. And on the table beside the breadboard sat a single folded slip of paper. Her hands shook as she picked it up. It wasn't addressed. No name, no note, just a map, sketched roughly in charcoal. The ridge, the riverbed, a cabin, this one, and beyond it to the northeast, marked in dark, angry lines. Do not go. She stared at those words, heart thudding. Then slowly, she turned the paper over. 3 more words were written on the back. He is watching. She didn't tell Weston she'd found the note. She didn't have to. That evening, when he returned, dirt smudged across his sleeves and sweat clinging to his neck. He paused in the doorway longer than usual, watching her. She stood beside the stove, stirring a pot of beans. His eyes tracked her movements like a man gauging distance in a duel. You didn't go out today? He said. No. You should rest. I am. He stepped inside, removed his coat, hung it near the door. She waited, spoon in hand, for him to ask, to explain. But he didn't, so she did. Who left the note? He didn't blink, didn't feign ignorance. Instead, he said, he wants to see if you'll run. And if I do, you won't make it far. She set the spoon down. Is he dangerous? She stood beside the stove, stirring a pot of beans. His eyes tracked her movements like a man gauging distance in a duel. You didn't go out today, he said. No. You should rest. I am. He stepped inside, removed his coat, hung it near the door. She waited, spoon in hand, for him to ask, to explain. But he didn't, so she did. Who left the note? He didn't blink, didn't feign ignorance. Instead, he said, he wants to see if you'll run. And if I do, you won't make it far. She set the spoon down. Is he dangerous? Yes. Is he after me? No. Then who? He looked at her, finally, deeply. His voice was low and steady. He's after what I never gave him, and what I never will. She swallowed. Which is? Weston didn't answer. Instead, he turned to the door, opened it, and stood there for a moment, staring into the trees. His breath came slow, measured. Then he said, without turning back, "Don't open the chest in the barn." And he left. She didn't sleep. The wind whispered through the cracks in the wall like someone speaking in a dream. Outside, something moved. Not loudly, but intentionally. A branch snapped. Then silence. She pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from crying out. It wasn't Weston. She knew that with a certainty that chilled her deeper than the frost. In the morning, she found a single red thread tied to the handle of the barn door. It hadn't been there before. By the 3rd day, Weston hadn't returned. She tended the fire, fed the dog, who whined at the door every few hours, and then curled up beneath the windowsill as if protecting her. She debated leaving, packing what little she had and walking east. But her boots were worn through. Her strength had only just begun to return. A photograph, creased and curled at the edges, showed Weston standing beside a red-haired woman and a little girl with a gap-toothed smile. His hand rested protectively on the girl's shoulder. Below the photo, wrapped in cloth, was a charred scrap of pale blue fabric, identical to the dress in the wardrobe. She touched it gently. At the bottom of the chest lay a letter, half burned, the ink blurred, but not gone. She lifted it carefully. Most of the words were unreadable, but a few sentences remained. Waited all night. She's coughing again. Please come home, Weston. I'm scared. Her chest tightened. She sat on the barn floor, holding the letter in trembling hands, eyes burning. The silence around her wasn't quiet. It was grief made still. When she emerged from the barn, dusk had fallen. Weston was standing in the clearing. He saw the look on her face, the ash on her fingers, and didn't ask. I wasn't supposed to be gone that long, he said. She didn't respond. I thought I could make it back in time, he continued. The fire spread faster than they said it would. By the time I saw the smoke, it was already done. She nodded slowly. I'm sorry. His jaw worked. I buried them behind the ridge, but I couldn't bury the sound. I hear things too, she whispered. Doors. My father's voice. The way he said my name, the way it stopped meaning anything. Weston looked at her then, not as someone broken, but as someone whole in the places he understood best. You didn't take me, she said. You saved me, even if you didn't mean to. Neither of them moved, but the space between them softened. That night, she didn't retreat to the cot. She sat by the fire while he cleaned his rifle. Her hands worked a piece of cloth into tight, nervous knots. The dog slept at her feet, and finally she spoke. There's something I haven't told you. Weston raised an eyebrow. My father, he's not just a judge. He's connected, dangerous. There's a reason I ran, and if the man following you is who I think he is, he's not alone. He said nothing. She reached into her bag and pulled out the envelope she'd carried since Silver Bluff. This is my name, she said. The only proof of it left. Birth record, identity. She stared at it for a long moment, and stood and fed it to the fire. The flame caught instantly, curling the edges. The paper crumbled into black ash and dropped silently into the hearth. She didn't watch it burn. She watched Weston. He watched her back, and neither looked away. That was the night something shifted, not just between them, in the air, in the rhythm of the days. She began waking before sunrise, fetching water, sweeping the floor, baking rough, heavy bread that he always ate without complaint. Weston spoke more, just barely. One day he brought back a packet of seeds, left them by the windowsill without comment. She planted them that same afternoon, in silence, but with care. Then came the man in the brown coat. He arrived just past dawn, on horseback, badge glinting on his chest, Sheriff Eli Burns. She was hanging laundry when the dog barked once, then again. She turned. The sheriff dismounted. Dust clung to his boots. His face was long and lean, mouth twisted in something between a smirk and a threat. Well, he said. Didn't expect to find you playing house, Grady. Weston appeared from behind the barn, rifle across his back. You're not welcome here, he said. Burns didn't blink. He looked straight at her. Miss, you all right? She didn't answer. I got a telegram, he continued. Girl missing, high-profile family. Word is she boarded a westbound train and vanished. That ring any bells? I wasn't taken, she said. Burns tilted his head. Then why no letters? No word? You just disappear into the hills with a man like this and expect no one to come looking? I didn't want to be found. Burns laughed. That's not how the law works, sweetheart. Weston stepped forward. She's not property. Funny, Burns replied. Your fist said otherwise last time we crossed paths. Still got the scar from where you broke my brother's jaw. You want a second one? Burns grinned without mirth. I want what's legal. She stepped forward. If you try to take me, I'll scream. I'll say you dragged me. I'll say whatever it takes, and it won't be a lie." Burns blinked. "I'd rather die in that cabin than go back," she said. The wind picked up. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Burns spat in the dirt. "You'll regret this." He mounted his horse and rode off, hooves throwing dust. Weston didn't speak, but she touched his arm once, and he didn't flinch. That night, she stood by the window, watching the stars. And behind her, Weston placed a second mug of tea on the table. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. She sat beside him, and finally felt what she hadn't in a long, long time. Safe. The next 2 days passed in a silence not of fear, but of preparation. Weston sharpened his knives. She gathered roots and herbs from the slope behind the cabin, drying them carefully by the fire. Neither said it aloud, but both felt it. The way a forest tenses before lightning, the way a wound waits to reopen. By the third night, the wind shifted. The dog paced near the door, ears twitching toward sounds no one else could hear. Then came the hooves. 3 horses, 1 lantern. She and Weston were already standing. He handed her the shotgun without a word. Her fingers wrapped around the cold wood. No tremble this time. Outside, boots hit dirt. Shadows stretched toward the porch. A voice rang out. "I gave you a chance, Grady." Sheriff Burns, lantern in one hand, revolver in the other. 2 deputies flanked him, rifles slung across their backs. All of them wore that same smug certainty. The look of men who believed the law was whatever they could shout the loudest. Weston stepped onto the porch. "I told you to stay away." Burns sneered. "You're harboring stolen blood. The judge back east wants her returned. You're obstructing that. Know what that makes you?" "Alive," Weston said. "For now." Burns cocked the hammer of his pistol. "She's not yours. She doesn't belong to anyone." Inside, she stood behind the door, heart thudding. She didn't want to hide, but she knew Weston's rhythm, his stance, how he moved, and she trusted it more than anything she'd ever known. Burns shouted, "You gonna let us take her, or do we paint this cabin red?" Weston didn't blink. "Come find out." One of the deputies moved toward the side. She stepped out then, into the doorway. Burns raised his pistol, but she didn't flinch. "You want to take me?" she called. "Come and see what happens." For a moment, all she heard was the dog growling behind her. Then a shot exploded. The night cracked. One of the deputies dropped to the ground, screaming, clutching his leg. Blood darkened the dirt. She'd fired. She didn't remember pulling the trigger. But she had, and now there was no going back. Weston moved with terrifying grace. 1 shot, reload, shift. The other deputy dropped, shoulder hit. Burns dove behind the trough, cursing. Gunfire lit the trees like lightning. She dropped to her knees, reloading. Weston crouched low near the porch rail, eyes tracking shadows. When the silence fell, it was thick and wet and final. Only the dog's whine remained. Weston stepped forward, boots crunching glass from a shattered lantern. "Come out, Burns." Nothing. Then, slowly, the sheriff rose, hands up. "All right," he panted. "All right." She stepped beside Weston, shotgun lowered but ready. Burns looked between them, blood on his lip, fury in his eyes. "This isn't over." Weston said nothing. Burns spat. "She'll never be safe. You hear me? Never." "Leave," Weston growled. Burns hesitated, then turned, dragging the wounded deputy toward a horse. The other limped behind them. They vanished into the trees, tails tucked, pride shattered. When the dust finally settled, she lowered the gun. Her hands were numb. Weston turned to her. "You all right?" She nodded, but she didn't believe it. Inside, she set the shotgun by the door and went straight to the stove. "I'll make tea," she said. "I'll fix the door," he replied. Neither of them smiled. But something shifted, like a pressure valve finally released. He sat while she boiled water. His arm was bleeding. She saw it but didn't speak. Instead, she grabbed the sewing kit from the shelf. He flinched when she touched him, but didn't pull away. "You could have let me go," she whispered. "I didn't want to." She looked up, needle poised. "I didn't want to either." That was the closest thing to a confession either of them had made. The next day, Weston rebuilt the porch rail with cedar from the ridge. She planted thyme and lavender near the window, working the earth with her bare hands. There was something meditative about it, about claiming ground, making something grow where fire had once taken everything. She didn't ask Weston to explain what came next. She just moved with the rhythm of the place. Each morning, he left. Each evening, he returned. No explanations, no lies. One evening, he brought back something wrapped in canvas. She opened it carefully. It was a sign, carved, rough, unfinished. Home. No name, no flourish, just one word, like a breath finally exhaled. They hung it above the door together. And that night, for the first time, they ate dinner side by side instead of across the table. The candle flickered between them. She reached across and brushed her fingers against his. "I want to stay," she said. Weston looked at her, slow and sure. "You already have." But peace never lasts long in places built from ashes. 3 nights later, she woke before dawn. The bed beside her was empty. She stood, pulled on her boots, and stepped outside. Weston was gone. The dog was gone. But in the distance, by the ridge, she saw smoke rising. And near the barn door, in the dirt, a symbol had been drawn in ash. A circle with a slash through it. The mark she hadn't seen since the city. Her father's people had used it to brand those who betrayed them. It meant one thing: retrieval. She ran, not away, but toward the ridge, toward the smoke. She found Weston kneeling by the graves again. But this time, he wasn't alone. A man stood across from him, dressed in black, long coat, no badge, just a presence that screamed threat. She stopped short behind a tree. The man's voice was calm, measured. "You knew this was coming, Grady." "I did." "You still protecting her?" "I am." The man sighed. "I've killed for less. I've buried more dangerous men." They stared at each other. Then Weston said quietly, "You don't get to take from me again." That was when the man turned and saw her. He smiled, and everything inside her went cold. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. It was thin, surgical, cutting straight through the dawn. She stepped out from behind the tree, shotgun in hand, every nerve in her body screaming. Weston stood, positioning himself slightly in front of her without a word. The man tipped his head. "She's grown bolder. I like that." Weston's voice came out flat. "Don't talk to her." "Still possessive, are we?" The man replied. "Not very professional, Weston. You used to be better." The woman's fingers tightened on the gun. "Who is he?" The man answered for them. "Name's Harlan Truce, though that name doesn't mean much to people unless they've bled for one." She didn't blink. "I've bled for worse." Truce chuckled. "Oh, you definitely have. But the question is, will you kill for worse?" He reached into his coat slowly. Weston tensed, hand near his holster. But Truce only pulled out a folded telegram and tossed it at their feet. She picked it up. Her name. Her real one. In full ink. Wanted by the court. Parental retrieval authorized. Non-lethal force preferred. Signed by a judge. Her father. Her stomach twisted. "This is legal?" she hissed. "It's endorsed," Truce said. "The old man's not above pulling strings, calling in favors, especially for family shame." "She's not going back," Weston said. "She doesn't have a say," Truce countered. "You know that. Once blood is claimed by court, it becomes property under inheritance rights. She has no standing." "She has me." Truce's eyes hardened. "Careful," he said. "You're making the same mistake twice." For a moment, none of them moved. Then Truce's fingers twitched. Weston drew first. The world snapped into motion. Shots cracked the air. Hers, his, Truce's. She dove behind the stone cross as bullets chewed bark and stone. Weston rolled to cover behind the ridge boulder, returning fire with precision. Truce moved like a ghost. Too fast, too smooth, vanishing behind trees between volleys. She caught a glimpse of him just before he fired. The round grazed her shoulder. White-hot pain bloomed. She hit the ground hard, breath gone. Weston shouted something she didn't hear. Everything blurred, mud, ash, the smell of powder. Then Weston was there, dragging her behind the ridge, covering her body with his as bullets slammed into the rock above. Blood ran down her sleeve. She clutched at it with her other hand. "He'll kill us both," she gasped. "No," Weston growled. "He'll try." He leaned out, fired twice. One shot hit. A cry echoed through the trees, then silence. Weston waited. The breeze shifted. Leaves rustled. But no more gunfire came. When they finally emerged, Truce was gone. But he'd left something behind. Burn marks in the dirt, boot tracks leading east, and a piece of paper nailed into the tree near the grave. Another copy of the telegram, only this one had blood on it, and one sentence scrawled beneath the signature: "I always finish my contracts." Back at the cabin, she sat at the table, arm bandaged, silent. Weston paced the room. "He's not just a contractor," she finally said. "He worked for my father, before the courts, before the badge." Weston nodded. "I know." She looked up. "How?" "Because I used to work with him." The room went still. Weston sat across from her. "I left when I saw what the job was doing to us. To me." "Was that before or after you met your wife?" "Just before." Did she know? He didn't answer. She rubbed her eyes. "My father kept me locked in a guest house on his property for nearly 2 years. Said it was to protect me. From the press, from my fiancé, from myself." Weston's voice was barely a breath. "Did Truce ever come there?" She nodded. "Once. He said he was there to check on the security. I think now he was there to remind me I was watched." Weston stood, crossed to the window. "He won't stop." She looked up. "Then neither can we." They didn't run, they fortified. The next day, Weston reinforced the door with steel brackets from the old shed. She laid traps along the east trail, tripwires with bells, shallow pits hidden beneath dry leaves. At night, they took turns keeping watch. On the third evening, Weston returned from the ridge with a box she hadn't seen before. Inside were 3 revolvers, an old bolt rifle, and a tin of black powder. She raised an eyebrow. Expecting a war. Preparing for one. That night, he showed her how to load the revolvers properly, how to hold it, breathe, aim. She hated how natural it felt in her hand. They fortified. The next day, Weston reinforced the door with steel brackets from the old shed. She laid traps along the east trail, tripwires with bells, shallow pits hidden beneath dried leaves. At night, they took turns keeping watch. On the third evening, Weston returned from the ridge with a box she hadn't seen before. Inside were 3 revolvers, an old bolt rifle, and a tin of black powder. She raised an eyebrow. Expecting a war? Preparing for one. That night, he showed her how to load the revolvers properly, how to hold it, breathe, aim. She hated how natural it felt in her hand. She moved like breath, circling toward the trap line. Then she saw it. The bell was cut. Cleanly. No disturbance in the leaves. Someone had disarmed it without tripping anything else. And near it, left on purpose, was another folded slip of paper, tucked beneath a stone. She opened it slowly. "This ends at dawn. 1 surrender, 1 life. Choose." She showed it to Weston. He didn't say anything, just stared at the fire for a long time. Then he stood. "Come with me." He led her to the barn, opened the floorboards beneath the hay, revealed a second cellar. Inside were supplies, ammo, canned food, and a door. Steel. Reinforced. A storm shelter? She asked. A fallback. He looked at her. If I don't make it, don't, she cut him off. You don't get to make speeches. He reached for her hand, held it gently, for the first time, without tension. I was gone too long, he whispered. That night, with my family. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought it would buy us time. It didn't. She swallowed hard. And now, he looked at her. I'm not going anywhere. That night, they slept in the same bed. Neither touched the other. But both knew it could be their last sleep. And in the morning, before the sun rose, Weston was already up, already dressed. He left her a note by the hearth. If it goes bad, go north. Don't stop at towns. Don't look back. You gave me peace. I'll give you time. She crumpled the note, didn't cry, just loaded the rifle and followed. She found him near the ridge, standing in the clearing, facing the trees. Truce stepped out a moment later. Alone. No deputies, no backup. He wore a black duster and gloves. His right hand was bare, thumb twitching slightly. You came, he said to Weston. Not to talk. Truce looked beyond him, straight at her. So did she. Weston raised his rifle. Let her go. Truce smiled. You don't get to bargain anymore. Then he drew. It was too fast. Weston fired. Truce ducked, shot twice. One hit Weston in the leg. Weston dropped to a knee but kept firing, steady and clean. Truce was forced back into the trees. She ran forward, dropped beside Weston. I told you to go. I told you to shut up, she said, tearing her scarf into strips to stop the bleeding. Another shot rang out, barely missing them both. They scrambled for cover. She laid down fire while Weston reloaded. They fought like wolves, cornered, outnumbered even by one man's cruelty. When Weston finally hit Truce in the shoulder, the man stumbled back, enough for her to flank him. She raised her revolver. Don't, Truce said, bleeding, breathing hard. You followed me across states, she said. I was doing my job. You were doing his. Then she fired, not to kill, to end it. The shot caught him in the thigh. He dropped, groaning, and Weston walked over and kicked the gun away. It's over, Weston said. Truce looked at her. It's never over. She leaned in. Then crawl back and tell him she died. Truce's brow furrowed. She? She pulled her last name from memory. My name is Evelyn, and I choose who I am now. Then she turned away, and for the first time in her life, no one followed. Weston limped as they walked back to the cabin. She supported his weight without comment, one arm wrapped tight around his waist, his breath catching with each step. The trees around them stood still, quiet, as if even the forest knew something had ended. But not what might come next. Truce had vanished by the time they returned to the clearing. No blood trail, no body. Just absence, heavy and uncertain. They didn't speak of it. Not yet. At the cabin, she helped him to the chair by the fire. His face was pale from blood loss, his shirt torn, dark with fresh crimson near the thigh. I'll get the kit, she said. He grabbed her wrist before she could stand. If I pass out. You won't, she cut in. He didn't argue, but his grip didn't release until she came back with the supplies. She worked in silence, pressing cloth to the wound, cleaning around it, stitching with shaking fingers. Weston didn't flinch. Bullet went through, she murmured. Good. Hurts like hell. Better than dead. She threaded the needle again. How many times have you been shot? He exhaled slowly. This makes 5. Same leg? Number, that one's new. She smiled without meaning to. Weston noticed, but didn't say anything. When she finished the stitching, she poured whiskey over the wound. He hissed, eyes clenched. She held him steady. You're lucky, she whispered. Am I? You didn't lose it. No, he said. But I've lost other things. She didn't press, not now. That night, snow fell. Not heavy, just enough to blur the edges of the world outside. They watched it from the cabin window, 2 mugs of tea resting on the table between them. The fire crackled quietly. The dog lay curled beside the hearth. Weston's leg was wrapped tight. He moved slower now, relying on the cane he'd carved from an old oak branch. She had taken over the morning chores: water, stove, wood. Not because he asked, because it felt like the right shape of silence. After a long pause, Weston spoke. "You told him your name?" She nodded. "Evelyn." "You sure?" She looked at the window again, at the snow. "I used to be. You want to change it?" She smiled, faint. "Maybe someday." He didn't press either. Some truths needed time. In the days that followed, they returned to rhythm. But it was different now, more deliberate. She painted the bedroom window pale blue. He built a second chicken coop out behind the barn. She found a collection of dried flower stems in the shed, lavender, sage, wild mint, and strung them from the beams above the fireplace. They never said the word home aloud, but it filled the spaces between their movements. One morning, she found a pair of boots by the door. Small, soft leather. Not new, but broken in just enough. Inside one was a note. "For the one who walks beside me." No signature. She slipped them on. They fit like memory. Weston healed slowly. Some days, he pushed too hard and had to rest by the fire. Frustration flickering behind his eyes, like lightning behind clouds. Other days, he let himself recover. On those days, she would sit beside him with a book, or a carving, or nothing at all. She learned to understand his silences. He learned to trust hers. They didn't sleep in separate rooms anymore. They didn't need to speak before reaching for each other's hands. But there were still shadows in both of them. Sometimes she would wake at night, pulse hammering, breath shallow. Weston wouldn't speak. He would just reach across the bed, touch her shoulder, and wait. Weeks passed. Spring crept through the trees. The creek, once frozen, now sang as it ran. The lavender she'd planted beneath the window broke through the soil, small, stubborn, alive. And then, one evening, Weston returned from the woods with something different, wrapped in canvas. He laid it on the table, stepped back. She unwrapped it slowly. It was a mirror, not large, oval-shaped, wooden frame, simple. She looked at him, puzzled. He nodded once. "You should be able to see yourself." She swallowed. "You haven't had one since." "I know." She turned the mirror in her hands, then, slowly, lifted it. The woman who stared back wasn't the girl from the train. She wasn't the girl who'd collapsed in the snow. She wasn't even Evelyn. The name felt like a dress still being tailored. She was someone in between. But she wasn't afraid of the reflection anymore. That night, she wrote something on parchment. Not a letter, not a journal. A story. There was a woman with no name, no ring, no place. She wasn't meant to survive. But a man who lost everything made space for her pain, not with words, not with rescue, but with stillness, with staying. She folded the story, placed it on the windowsill, held down by a small stone. The next morning, it was gone. But in its place was a new note. "Stay as long as you want." She didn't need to read it twice. One evening, as the sun burned low across the ridges, she stood outside with her hands in the dirt, planting onions this time. The dogs snored nearby, half buried in grass. She felt Weston's boots before she heard them. He didn't speak, just sat beside her on the porch step. She looked over. "You ever think about what they're saying about us down there?" she asked. He shrugged. "Doesn't matter." "No. They don't know us." She smiled. They don't. But shadows have long legs, even in spring. One morning, a rider passed through town. Said he was heading north, but stopped for whiskey at the saloon. Sat by the stove. Listened. He told the bartender a story. About a cabin in the hills. A man with a scarred face. A woman with no name who shot a lawman in the dark. No one said anything. But the room went quiet. He left before sundown. Didn't say where he was going. But someone followed him out. And that someone carried a ledger, the kind courts like to update when they find the living where the dead should be. Back at the cabin, Evelyn and Weston sat together, watching the light fade. Neither of them knew that the past was mounting its final charge. Not yet. But they could feel the wind shift, the way the earth sometimes does before something breaks. And though neither said it, they were ready, whatever came, together. They came at dawn. Not like raiders, not like lawmen, like something in between, official enough to hide behind papers, armed enough to kill if they had to. 3 riders, 1 carriage, no banners, no colors, just the dust of legal pursuit and the weight of power that didn't need to announce itself. The first to dismount was a man in a gray coat, spectacles glinting. He wasn't here to bleed. He was here to document. The second was younger, hard eyes, hands on the hilt of his sidearm before he even took a step. The third, well, she knew who he was before he removed his hat. Judge Abram Kessler, her father's proxy. Weston saw them first. He was chopping wood when the horses crested the hill. He didn't reach for a weapon, not yet. He just called into the cabin. "Company!" She was already at the window, pulling her shawl tight. Her boots hit the porch a moment later. They stood side by side as the men approached. The judge was first to speak. "Miss Kessler." She didn't respond. "I represent the court. You are still legally bound to your family estate by birth and bloodline." Weston spoke evenly. "She has no interest in that life." "That is not hers to decide," the judge said. Evelyn stepped forward. "Then who gets to decide?" "You." "My father? The men who sent Truce?" "Truce was a rogue," the judge replied quickly. "We didn't sanction violence." "Then why did he know my name?" she snapped. "Why did he have a copy of a retrieval order signed by the same court you claim to serve?" He hesitated. "There were oversteps, but it doesn't change the legality." She laughed once, low and bitter. "That's what this is to you? A legality?" The man in the gray coat opened a ledger. "Miss Kessler, by failing to return to your family's guardianship, you have violated the estate's inheritance contract. You forfeited everything," she interrupted. "I know. And yet," the judge said, "you've gained nothing." She looked at Weston, at the porch, at the lavender pushing up through cold earth. "No," she said. "I've gained everything." The younger man moved then, quick, cocky. "Ma'am, we can do this the easy way." Weston's voice sliced the air. "She's not going anywhere." The young man reached for his pistol. He never drew it. Because the dog, silent until now, lunged forward with a snarl and sank its teeth into the man's thigh. The man went down screaming, trying to kick it off. Evelyn raised her rifle. "I don't want to shoot you," she said calmly. "But I will." The judge stepped back, pale. The man in the gray coat dropped the ledger and lifted his hands. Weston hauled the young officer to his feet and shoved him back toward the others. The dog growled, teeth bared. "This is your warning," Weston said. "We'll come back," the judge hissed. "With more." "No," Evelyn said. She reached into her coat, pulled out a single envelope, yellowed, sealed, and handed it to the judge. "My father's confession." The judge stared at it. "Impossible." "You think I ran without taking anything?" she said. "You think the old man didn't leave shadows behind? Pages torn, letters unfinished, receipts from places he claimed never to visit?" She stepped closer. "This document proves everything. His manipulation, his threats, his use of bounty hunters off the record." She leaned in, "And it's not the only copy." The judge paled. "You're bluffing." She smiled coldly. "Try me." Silence. Then he took the envelope, turned, and left. The others followed, wounded, shamed. They never looked back. That evening, the wind returned. Not harsh, not biting, but clear, clean. Weston stood by the porch. Coat unbuttoned, rifle slung. She joined him, mug in hand. "He'll get away with it," she said. "You know that." "Maybe," Weston replied, "but not with me." No. They watched the stars emerge, one by one. A week passed, then 2. Spring bloomed fully in the hills. The creek sang louder. The chickens laid more. The world turned. And neither of them spoke of leaving. One day, Weston came back from the ridge carrying a new carving, unfinished, rough. It was a bird with broken wings. He placed it on the mantel beside the mirror. She didn't ask what it meant. She knew. Later that week, she rode into town. Alone, not hiding, not fleeing. She bought flour, salt, left the store without a word. But people watched. They whispered. She's still alive. Still up there with Grady, still walking around like she's allowed to exist. Evelyn turned once in the street, met their stares, and for the first time, didn't flinch. Back at the cabin, she found Weston asleep in the chair. The dog snored under the table. She unpacked the supplies, then pulled out a folded page from her coat pocket. She sat at the table, pen in hand, and began writing. They called me the girl with no name, but I was never nameless. I just hadn't chosen yet. She paused, looked out the window, at the trees, the ridge, the place where she had almost died, and almost found herself. Then she wrote, "My name is Evelyn, but if I could choose again, I'd still pick silence. Because sometimes, peace doesn't need a name. It just needs someone to stay." The fire crackled low. Weston stirred, looked over at her. She met his eyes. "You ever wonder what might have happened if I hadn't gotten off that train?" He nodded. "Sometimes." And he looked at the carving on the mantel, then at her. "I think I would have heard the silence anyway." She smiled, stood, walked to him, took his hand, and didn't let go. Far away, in a courtroom filled with velvet chairs and silence, Judge Kessler opened a sealed envelope. Inside, he found a blank sheet of paper. He turned it over. One sentence was written on the back. "This is what you get when you try to own a life you never understood." He burned it in his office hearth. No one ever asked him what it said. But he started drinking again, and never stopped. Back on the ridge, the lavender bloomed wild. The carved sign above the door faded slowly in the sun. Home. No more riders came. No more whispers chased them. Only the wind, and the creek, and the quiet beating of 2 hearts learning how to live again. Together.